Well, welcome once again to ARTbreak, everyone. And today I think we have a particularly interesting program. I think all of us at one time or another have seen a stereographic photograph, which may recall typically has two images that are very similar mounted on a card. And then when you use a viewer, and this is kind of the vintage viewer. Well, you get the idea. You put it in the holder, and these two separate images that have been taken just slightly different angles merge into a single three-dimensional image. So it's kind of a fascinating process that really is as old as photography itself. And why it's easy to think of this as sort of like, sort of a curiosity from a bygone area. Stereographic photography really has a very long and fascinating history. It really took off in the 1850s when Queen Victoria expressed a particular interest in it. And these photographs and viewers really spread around the world. Millions of these cards were made, and they were used in homes, they were collected, and many of them today are in archives in museums. Well, our guest today, Colleen Woolpert, is an artist who works in a variety of photographic media, and she has a special interest in the stereographic photographs and process. In part, this comes from her fascination with how we see things and how different individuals can see things very differently, and that the art of perception is more than just optics and mechanics, but it really brings a sense of wonder and stimulates the imagination in all kinds of ways. So she's not only created her own stereographs as part of her work, but also invented and patented a new stereographic viewer, which we'll hear about later. And what makes it special, it's much easier to use, it's portable, and what it really allows is that institutions that had these photographs in their archives and couldn't have no way of really displaying them so they could be seen to the public, now can do so because these viewers just hang right below the stereograph, and it's very easy to see them as they were intended to be seen. And I should say that Colleen's viewer really is kind of a work of art in itself. It's very beautifully, they're all handmade, they're beautifully designed, and you'll hear about that later. And so this, her viewer's been used in the Museum of Modern Art for exhibits at the Smithsonian Studies for American Arts, and also you can see here in Kalamazoo in the local history room of the public library, ongoing exhibit called In-Depth Kalamazoo, Our City. So with that in mind, please welcome Colleen Woolpert.
Thank you, Greg. That was really nice. And I can take 5 minutes out of my talk now, the history of stereographs. I said, thank you, that's very nice. How is my volume? Let me know if you want me to slow down, speed up, what have you, but let's begin. After the program, depending on time, you're welcome to come up. I have some stereographs of mine, some old viewers, my twin scope viewer that Greg talked about on the table here. If you were at the West Michigan area show, the book Virus Romance that I produced was in that show, and it's up here now. So you can come up and have some interactivity. There's also an iPad, so you would pick up the viewer and look at images from the old paper mill in Vicksburg, the Lee Paper Company former mill. So I'll talk about all those things. But I'm going to begin by saying thank you for coming today, and thank you so much to the KIA for having me. It's a delight to be here. and to be back home in West Michigan. I've lived in 7 states in my life. I was raised in West Michigan, but all of my curiosities took me to parts that spoke to me for one reason or another. And then once I landed there, I started making work that was informed by the location, maybe the history of the location, and eventually ended up back here where a lot of my inspiration first began as an undergrad at WMU. This quote is from author John Stilgoe. Outside Lies Magic is his book, and he says, outside lies utterly ordinary space, open to any casual explorer willing to find the extraordinary. Outside lies unprogrammed awareness that at times becomes directed serendipity. Okay, I think I got this. When I read this in his book, I kind of got it because my life has seemed like one magical event unfolding into the next and leading me, as if a captain, I'm charting a boat in a kind of general direction, and then letting the wind take me somewhere that sometimes only in hindsight I understand how I got there. A lot of serendipity in my life, and probably in all of our lives if we're paying attention, and I tend to follow that. In the description, it says that I'm an identical twin, the description for the program, born on Halloween, and I have a sort of a penchant for the uncanny. Well, if you're a twin born on Halloween, how could you not? So I grew up looking at my mirror image, and that's me with the barrette in my hair as a young girl. And then throughout our lives, I've kind of always looked to my twin sister as a way to understand myself. And we all have questions about the self. Mine is just, or for any twin, it's more complicated. The question is, who am I in relation to you? Some formative experiences from my youth. Has anyone been to the Musée Mécanique in San Francisco? It's at the pier now. Curious if anyone's been there. Okay, great. It's a really wonderful place. I went when I was 8, and it was formerly at the Cliff House, pictured here in the 1970s. You see on the left-hand side a yellow something, that's a camera obscura that showed the ocean. But if you went to the backside of the building underneath, you came into this amazing museum of mechanical contraptions like peep shows and fortune-telling devices. I was 8 years old and terribly captivated by this. So much so that when I was out there again in my 20s, I took pictures of some of the machines that most interested me. This is the mutoscope device. You put your eyes to the viewer and you turn a hand crank and you play a motion picture at a rate that you control, because there are 700 or so images on a drum that rotate under your control. This is the film that was playing in this device. When I took the picture, Marilyn Monroe having a moment with this gentleman that I got to manipulate the speed of that encounter, which is, really wonderful to give control to the viewer. My twin sister Ronnie on the left, she's wearing glasses. And growing up, the glasses meant to me just that this is how people could tell us apart. But when we were 11 years old, we watched The Return of the Creature from the Black Lagoon. Anyone seen that? Okay, it was televised in 1981, 82. I think I'm aging myself. Anyway, we watched the film, and when the creature lunged off the screen at us, I recoiled and Ronnie didn't move. And that kept happening. I said, "Don't you see it?" And she said, "See what?" But she didn't know that she didn't have depth perception. She didn't know what depth perception was. My mind was really blown because I thought we experienced everything the same way, being identical twins, but her worldview was radically different from mine. And I'm showing this picture so that you not only see her glasses, but you see her eye, her right eye is turned inward. That's showing you the condition that she has called strabismus, where both her eyes are functional, but they're not looking in the same direction at the same time. In order to have binocular vision or depth perception, you need both your eyes looking in the same direction at the same time. Right, Greg? Okay. I'm sorry. That was just an interesting moment. Yeah, a good demo. So Ronnie, her eyes turn inward, and I'd like you guys to see how Ronnie sees for a minute. And I think it's somewhat possible if you'll follow along with me and humor me by raising your finger here, any finger, just that index finger, and closing one eye, and then being aware of whatever's in the background behind your finger, okay? So you have a picture of your finger that you're seeing, and then something behind it. When you open this is how Ronnie sees. And she can tell what's in front and what's behind by the size of objects and other depth cues. But if you open both eyes, your finger, it should pop out if you have depth perception, and it's right there, right? So that's how I see, that's how she sees. And if you do this trick where you close one eye again, okay, and then alternate which eye that you close. Okay, so you're blinking your eyes, making this funny face. What do you see? Yeah, it's moving. What you're seeing are the two independent views. I always took my vision for granted, but those exercises show us that we see a left eye view and a right eye view, and the brain puts it together to create the experience of depth. So what's next? Okay. Ronnie grew up as an artist. She saw a flat world, and then she translated her flat reality to a drawing sheet or a painting canvas. So I joke with her, like, art wasn't too hard for you then, huh? Because you didn't have to make that translation. But she was always the celebrated artist of the two of us. In fact, nobody thought of me as an artist at all. I played the clarinet, and I didn't know who I was. I was kind of the submissive twin, if you will. Ronnie got scholarships to the Art Institute of Chicago. You know, she was the artiste. So I was floundering. When I went to WMU, then I enrolled there because I wanted to do visual art and drop the clarinet, but I had no portfolio, no training. So WMU allowed people in with no prerequisites, which was great, into the art program. And this postcard I picked up right before I started college, and it's an image by Henri Cartier-Bresson, Madrid, Spain, 1933, I believe. And this image made me want to be a photographer. What was it about this image? You know, it was just so enigmatic. I couldn't discern what the subject was. There was a lot of mystery in this image, a lot of activity. I think now looking at it, there's a lot about the gaze, with the people that are looking and being looked at, and it's just an odd composition. And also Cartier-Bresson was really concerned with the frame, and the frame became a way of thinking about the theater of life. The frame is a stage, and what happens in life is the action on that stage. I want to be a photographer. Sophomore year at WMU, I was in the photo program. This is another image from those early years. This is by William Klein. Rest in peace. He just died this year. Another one of those what's going on here kind of photographs. I don't think I could have told you why I loved it, but I just did. So the next image has male nudity. So my first roll of film I brought to class. Let's see, how do I preface this? I was going to my first critique where you put the work up on the wall. So this next image was my first critique, my first roll of film. It was taken when I was walking the train tracks up to campus behind the Munchie Mart. And there's a culvert across the way with a couple guys standing there, and one of them decided on the left to perform for me briefly while I focused the camera. And then he said, "Your turn." And I said, "Gotta go, class starting in 5. Okay, so I think that was a bold way to start my photography career. And the professor said as much, and I was encouraged, and I loved photography, street photography. This was my first published photograph, a 7-inch for the band Vine, a Kalamazoo band, from one of those first couple rolls of film. This will come up later as a serendipitous now moment, but this was way back in 91. I graduated from WMU and started a photography business in 96, and for 12 years it was full-time. I shot freelance for the Gazette, local magazines, and then eventually national magazines. And then I was shooting events and weddings in 15 states and just having a ball. But after maybe 2004, I started feeling like there's something more I want to say, and there's something more that I want to do besides straight photography. But I had always directed the camera at her, and this was in 2000 on our Halloween birthday, and she wanted to go out as twins, so I went along. We put on wigs and wore the same clothes so people could, have the staring situation. But in 2000 as well, I went into the Kalamazoo Antiques Market and saw a stereoscope for the first time. Being a photographer, I knew that was a picture, but there were 2 of them. Being a twin, I probably identified, or I don't know if I thought it that deeply. I just knew I put it to my eyes, and then, wow. And if you haven't had the experience before, you will today, but it's like an immersive theater, really close. Unlike 3D movies, the stereoscope brings a very small 7-inch wide image right up to our eyes, and there's the diopter on the lens of a +5 that magnifies things and then puts the 2 images together in 3D. The lenses have a curvature that act like the brain to bring the images together for you. So looking at this image of stereoscope, this is a scene in London. I wasn't just looking at the street, I was standing on the street with the participants. It's that immersive. I bought my first 3D camera short time after. This is the Sputnik medium format camera. They were produced in the 1950s, I've been told, by Russian prisoners. They have some issues with them, but I loved it. And this image is total magic because it's a double exposure. You know, when you get the film back and sometimes you don't realize you ran it through the camera twice, and shoot, you've got an image overlaid another one. That happened with my self-portrait. I'm in my photography studio. That's my photo enlargement on the background. There's a printer behind me. There's a bulletin board with some images on it. But lo and behold, Ronnie interjected herself on my self-portrait. What the heck? I'd gone to Lansing the week before and took a picture of her holding her shirt up to expose her pregnant belly with her firstborn, and her dogs at her feet. Her houseplants are in the distance. And I just marveled at how these images overlaid to become a portrait of us together at a time in our lives when she was nurturing life and I was tending my photography business. I was a workaholic, she was a new mother. And I just love some of the elements, like the bulletin board is full of photos, like I'm building my business, and her houseplants are running up the bulletin board. That's life. We're just experiencing stereoscopic vision at the same time. She was in vision therapy, I was getting the camera. So we're both starting our journey with 3D. And I forgot to mention the stereoscope that I bought at the Kalamazoo Antiques Market. I thought if I bought one for Ronnie, she could use it and that might help her on her journey, not realizing that stereoscopes were definitely used for vision therapy at the turn of the century. But just thinking if she could see this, she'd know how the world is supposed to look like. I put that in quotes because I don't think there's any supposed to, but I've been putting stereoscopes to her eyes for 20 some years. I dabbled with stereo photography and then finally realized, I need to get out of the commercial realm with my photography, and I went to graduate school at Syracuse University. And this was my first stereo photography project called The Night. I was going to bars and house parties and creating these kind of voyeuristic scenes. And then I was offered an exhibition opportunity in 2010 to show the work, and I matted and framed my photos as I'd always done with my photography. And then I went online and I tried to find a stereoscope, just like that antique viewer, something that kept the light out of the side of the eyes. It had those beautiful achromat lenses, and the optical experience would be so nice. And there was nothing, I could not find anything. And I thought, well, how do people do it? How did they show stereographs on the wall then? Well, this is a problem, it seems. And in fact, I got to learn quite a bit about the problem as I knew about images or exhibitions at the Met, exhibitions at the Corcoran that showed stereographs, none of them with viewers, like a Muybridge show without any viewers, sadly. In any case, I resorted to $4 lorgnettes that people would pick up at the exhibition and use, but I knew they weren't having the optical experience. They weren't going to get it. And a lot of people didn't know about 3D photography. This is pre-Avatar, and so pre-3D, really. This is not how I wanted people to be introduced to something that I really loved and appreciated. This is the house I lived in Syracuse when I was attending graduate school, 1870s house. And I had my studio at the Gear Factory, which is the former Lipe Machine Works. And the history of those buildings interested me enough that I went down to the Onondaga Historical Association Museum, to their archive on the 5th floor, and I started looking into the house. And while I was there, I found on the left, this is one example of a stereograph depicting Syracuse in the 1880s. We're looking at the Erie Canal, which is now the downtown with no canal anymore. I found 300 or so views of Syracuse taken by local photographers in the late 1800s. And what's interesting is so much of the earliest documentary photographs of our cities are in 3D, because the studio photographers with their big portrait cameras would also have a smaller format 3D camera, and they'd go out on the street and they'd take images of the towns. So you can find images as early as the 1860s, 3D images of towns. The museum director was walking through the archive, and I held up to him a stereoscope with a view in it like this. And he was like, oh, wow, he was just like this boy. He said, I've never seen these before. And I said, but surely you know you have, besides the 300 of Syracuse, you have like 6,000 stereographs in your collection. And he said, yeah, but I've never seen them like this. He'd never seen them in 3D. I said, have you ever exhibited them? And he said, no, how would we? And I said, but I'm working on a solution. Yeah, and I didn't really have a solution at the time. But I was a teaching assistant at Syracuse University in grad school in a history of design course. And so I was reading a lot of design theory and thinking about what were the main components of that antique stereoscope that were most important that I wanted to bring into a contemporary means of wall-mounted stereograph display. This looks like a really easy jump, but no, there's like many months and sketches and notes that go. Then we're at this stage where I believe the stereograph is an art object in its own right. I really love comparing the two views on the card because it demonstrates binocular vision, how we have a left and right eye view. And it's almost like a magic trick is revealed, but there's still some mystery. You see both images and you can compare them. Also, often as a child, we were asked to stand side by side for comparison. So I don't want just to see, when you watch a 3D movie, you see it in 3D, but you don't see the genesis of what created that. So I love the stereograph. And then I like that you have that extra opportunity then to make the image come to life for yourself by grabbing the stereoscope. Late one night in Seattle, 2 a.m., started a mock-up here with like some gaffer tape, and that's it on the left. And eventually cast the first rubber piece. I didn't. I had somebody help me because I was a photographer. I didn't have any of the knowledge of how to do this. This image demonstrates some of the production process. It's pressure cast rubber poured in 2 parts, A and B, and mixed together, and you have 4 minutes to get it in the mold and put it in the pot before things start settling up. I have to use a laser cutter to cut the wood pieces, of which there are 4 different lens boards. And I joined the makerspace here in Kalamazoo and was using that facility here, but at the time in Syracuse, I was with a makerspace there. And that's a whole nother talk, basically going from concept to finished art object / product, which was about 5 years of my life and 7 years before I got the patent. So there was a lot of starts and stops, and a whole year, 2014 to 2015, where I just quit altogether. It was costing me money. I was not eating out. I was not doing the normal things people do because I had to buy another $200 bucket of rubber, just like that. What's important here, priorities. But I didn't know if it was ever going to go, so I quit. And then a year later, I imagined myself on the deathbed going, God, there was this thing I wanted to do. I never did it. So I had to keep going with it. And by the time the exhibition happened at the Onondaga Historical Association, which, I didn't mention, the museum director said, how would we exhibit them? And I said, I'm working on a solution. And he said, would you curate a show for us? And I was like, sure, thinking it would be maybe a couple dozen images. They showed me a small space, but then they moved it to their largest exhibition space for temporary exhibits, which is 1,000 square feet. And I'm thinking about little stereographs of Syracuse that are 7 inches wide, and how am I going to fill 1,000 square feet of space? So I'd seen enough of the stereographs at the research center there to know they had quite a lot. It's going back to like glass views from the 1850s by the Langenheim brothers. They had French tissue views. They had an extraordinary collection. And like I said, 6,000 of them. So I wondered, oh man, what if I did a timeline of the history of the stereograph? Which I didn't even know the history of the stereograph, but they had the materials that would make that possible. So I did what I thought would be a real bear and very difficult, and I did that thing. This is the exhibition Sight Unseen. It went up 2012. I got my MFA in 2011. I was working on it both in Syracuse and then in Seattle, where I moved to from after grad school. The museum had no budget to speak of, so we had to get really creative. And these are oak display cases that were somewhere else in the museum. And I thought if we built some walls inside, we could gang all these stereographs up and keep them 5 inches from the front. That's what we did. We had over 100 original stereographs on display. There was a timeline of the history of stereographs from 1850 to 1930, and all of them viewable with some manner of my twin scope viewer. I called the show Sight Unseen, partly because these had never been seen before if the director hadn't seen them, and he said nobody was coming in to look at these. All these wonderful views of Syracuse and beyond. A couple images from the exhibition. I had the rubber forms worked out and made a couple. So there's one on the wall here in the middle image. The Birth of Photography in the lower left, you see some early stereoscopes that they had in their museum. And in fact, the historian said, what museum did you borrow these from? And I said, but you have them up on that cool old dusty shelves up there on the 5th floor. So I was just working with everything that they had. The far right image, you're seeing a variety, a case with some images of the moon and images that people would buy in the stationery shops back in the late 1800s of, say, foreign lands. And there was a case of Syracuse-only views, a couple dozen. I had to learn the history of stereophotography to do this show, of course, and did a lot of research. And this would be the start of it in New York. It started in England and France, came over by wealthy businessmen who brought the craze over to the US. This is the Appleton store in New York, late 1860s. People are looking at the views, and they've got an older stereoscope before the American stereoscope that we're familiar with. So like I said, these were the first documentary photographs of towns. This is a Syracuse view of the Erie Canal. When you look through at this, you're walking down the towpath. Civil War was heavily documented in stereo, and before this you had newspapers with woodcut illustrations or prints. So people really got a taste of the war here. This is the embalming surgeon, and I just found that a particularly interesting view. So these came directly from the show that I produced, and being careful to keep the stereographs protected by wrapping them in monofilament and not adhering them, but placing them on a card. Stereographs also interest me besides the fact that they're documentary images and they create that wonderful immersive effect. Well, sometimes it's what you see is not what you get. Like you may pass by this 7-inch card and it doesn't look like much. It's not that special, but once you see it with the magnification of the lenses and in 3D, you see that it's all hand colored, except the back part, which stays black and white, and there's a man back there in a hat. It's just so cool. You know, you feel like a child. Ooh, discovery. There are also beautiful art objects, oftentimes with the one on the upper left that's a glass view with a gorgeous mount, and below is an example of a French tissue view, where you look at the front side of it with direct light and it looks like a black and white photo. And I'm sorry I don't have the back side, but if you were to hold it up to the light, you'd see that it's been colored. A second layer of tissue is added to the back that's been colored, so it's in full color, and they've pinpricked those chandelier lights. So you have this kind of extra layer of before and after. They're exquisite and fragile and beautiful. Here's a stereo photographer with his twin lens back in the day in his portable darkroom. By 1900, they were all the rage in homes, and this man in the background is holding a stereoscope. This was half of a stereograph, so you could go in the store and buy this view of people enjoying them. And we had tours of the world, taking people to faraway places. All of these library books are actually stereographs that are bound into collections like Italy and France, and came with a map to show you where the photographer shot. They were sold by young college boys. So look out when they come to show you their wares, that they don't woo your wife. You know what I'm saying? So this was part of the series of humorous views, showing a stereograph salesman. And I also did a project in Syracuse where I put a stereoscope, not of my design, in the landscape in front of a fountain. And you would be standing exactly where the photographer was in the 1870s when you look through the stereoscope and you see a 3D view that aligns with the current fountain, but shows what was there. And this was a piece about civic engagement with our lands, and just a conversation across time with people who are looking back at you from 1870 in the same place you're standing. Oh, a little preface. So I feel like I have to, before I jump to the next one, say the show happened. I moved to Seattle after graduate school, and I was taken away from this whole stereographic work. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just couldn't stand the winters in Syracuse anymore. So I was out in Seattle, and I saw the library sent an email about an exhibition by blind artists, a tactile art group. They were having an exhibition at the library, and I was more excited about this email than any contemporary art shows I was going to in Seattle. So I ended up going to the show. This is probably a year later, once I'd been working with the group for a while. I introduced myself and saw the work, and kind of just invited myself to join the group. So I would go once a month. We'd meet in the back of an art building, and for 8 hours we'd make art. I was a facilitator, not a teacher, so I was just grabbing coffee and sitting next to people and having conversations. And basically, I didn't know what I wanted to do creatively, but I had a feeling some ideas would bubble up. So people would say something to me, I might write it down. And I started reading books about applying this. one of the last projects before I left Seattle, the artists were making 20-inch clay faces, self-portraits. And I saw the moon in them. I mean, that's not a big leap. So I created these prints and gave one to everybody. So that's Anne. That's Becky. I mean, believe me, if you saw everyone in the group and then you saw these, you would know who's who. That's Camille, and there were 9 artists. So these can be presented as prints or, you know, something like this on the wall. I will work that out. But I had just started to think about what to do with material, and I was offered a residency back in Syracuse, where I just moved from at the Salt Quarters, an old building in the neighborhood where my photography studio was. This is a box, something I gave for them at the conclusion, but they resuscitated an old restaurant in the neighborhood. While I was there for 6 months, I had a free apartment, I had a free art studio, and $1,200 a month. So while other people in the residency got jobs, I was like, $1,200, all I need. You pay my rent, I can work with this. And I just made art full time for the 6 months I was there. I took all the documentation from my time working with the artists, with their permission, I should say. For a year, all I did was hang out with the group. And then when I started making videos and doing anything, we would have conversations about it. So it was definitely, I won't say collaborative, but they knew what I was doing and they approved of it. And we were on the journey together. This is the print it left, and another piece at the Griffin Museum of Photography in Winchester, Massachusetts. And my solo show at Onondaga Community College in Syracuse. Now, this is a lot of work, maybe 10 different pieces that you're just seeing. I'm just going to show you a few here, but when you walk into the gallery, it's pitch dark. Your eyes are kind of like, what am I seeing? What's going on? Except there's a video projection on the back wall. And let's see if I can. Sorry for the streamers, but I'm going to try to do this where I hop over to my website and show you the video that's internet. I think this is what we did. If it doesn't work, I'll just shoot. Yeah. It's already loaded. Sorry, thanks. Thanks, Jessica. Okay, this is another video that was the artist making. It's not the video that was on the back wall. This is the one I told Jessica I was going to show. However, yeah, making that work. So it was in a brightly lit art classroom. But this whole show, the concept, I was thinking about astronomy and celestial analogies, because one of the artists said to me that she missed looking at the night sky most of all. She's blind, and she didn't miss looking at her friends, her flowers. No, it was the night sky. And I thought, wow, that seems such a metaphor. I started researching astronauts and their experiences too. And the astronaut said, whenever I go out, I put my life in my hands. That's exactly what Becky had said to me. So the show, I'll get back. Oh, how do I shoot? All right, I'll get there. I think I got it. Okay, thanks. Yeah. So the video I was going to show, you'll have to imagine Camille on the back wall. She's just blinking. Her face is there. She's blinking. We did this piece together. I went to her apartment. I told her what I was going to do. We positioned the light, and she's blinking. And the light from the video creates the only light source in the room. So your eyes adjust, and you start to see these cards. Oops. I want to get it full screen. You start to see something on the side walls, and those are cards the size of business cards. There's 1,100 of them. They're brailled, and each of them says unknown, except 144 of the 1,100 have a person's first name. So I had done the work in Seattle, but then continued conceiving the show in Syracuse. I went to an agency called Aurora, and they had services for blind people, and worked with somebody there. And she talked to her support group, and she told them about my project, and she said, does anybody want to provide their name for these business cards? So 144 people, I don't know what percentage of the group that was, but they contributed. So there's instructions in the gallery that say you may touch the walls. And the Braille is like little stars, but it's making a connection between the sighted and the non-sighted, right? So you touch that and you're having an introduction. Now, if you can read Braille, you would read, some of them say unknown, some of them have names. So it's hard for me to switch to video, but if you go to the webpage for this project, you'll see there's a video of Anne from Aurora. She came into the gallery as part of my programming, and she read the Braille cards. So then she could reverse. What we do in the museums is often accessibility, right? So it's a sighted explaining, or somehow leading the non-sighted to experience art. In this, I flipped it around. Somebody who knows Braille is telling the sighted audience what else is in the work. How do I get rid of this stuff at the bottom? This piece is called Planet of the Blind. It's a TV that I owned that only had static coming off of it. And I cut some vinyl and kept the circle in there. And the impression you had across the room was a planet spinning in space. And instructions said you can turn the dial. And each iteration, each click is a different iteration of static. The idea here came from my friend Camille, who's blind, and said her vision is like a TV, they can't get the picture. It's also the title of a book by Stephen Cosisto. Yeah, Stephen Cosisto is an author, poet in Syracuse that I greatly admired, and got up the nerve to call him one day and ask if he'd come to the gallery and do a reading. And I really enjoyed speaking with him. So here he is with Nero, his guide dog, doing a reading of his poetry. Now, like the second to last page of his book, Planet of the Blind, I read it after I made the piece, and it said, the Planet of the Blind is like a TV. Wow. Wow. What serendipity there too. Here we are after the show. All right, I want to talk about the patent now. People always ask me, how did you get a patent and why? Why would you get a patent for a stereoscope that is not really something that the masses are looking for? How many people need a wall-mounted stereoscope for the home? It was really kind of an art project based on this history in Syracuse. I went to the Erie Canal Museum one day, and there was a book in the shop, and this was the book. I didn't know there was a history of early photo and cinema in this part of New York. Of course, I knew Rochester, Kodak motion pictures. But I picked up the book, I ended up buying it, and the first page on the left was this little book, the cover of History of the Kinetograph, Kinetoscope, and Kinetophonograph by W.K.L. Dixon. Would you believe I had a bag with me that day with my wallet and one book in it, and it was this book. So I went, no, what the heck is this all about? And turned the page. And on the right-hand side is the light building, but that's where my studio was. What's going on? Wait, that's a mutoscope. What's happening? Well, the mutoscope was invented in the building where my studio was. And here, I'm a girl who loves the mutoscopes. Of course, I called the landlord and said, my photo studio, the mutoscope was invented here. Of course, he's like, what's a mutoscope? Nobody cared, but I did. And now when they talk about the history inventions in Syracuse, since I was blasting about this all the time, they've added the mutoscope. But this is an image from the Musée Mécanique I took in my 20s that shows the branding on it. And I was smart, I guess, to take this because years later I could see American Mutoscope and Biograph Company. These were the guys in Syracuse who went to New York and started Biograph, the big film production house. Who were they? W.K.L. Dixon. This is my #1 ghost crush. He was Edison's inventor of motion pictures. Boy, I wish I could have had a beer with that guy, but it was the 4 of these guys in Syracuse. Herman Kasler filed the patent. And with this map here, upper left is the light building, and below that is where Kasler, the patent holder, where he lived, and Salt Quarters on the right is where I was doing the residency. So my former art studio was there. Now here, I was in the neighborhood, and it just seemed to me I needed to research this story much more. And I was giving public talks about this history, but in particular the mutoscope and the early cinematic inventions. Here's Kasler's patent. When I say it was an art project, I started thinking about the correlation between inventions and art. What's the difference? And both of these involve having an idea and making it manifest into something. Unless you're a conceptual artist or soloist, and the concept is the end game. But a lot of us have something in our head and we make it manifest. In fact, with patent language, the term prior art refers to the piece that came before your piece that you're working on. So I got myself a patent attorney, Barney Muldrum, fun guy. He got it, and we went on a journey together where I wrote a lot of the patent, but together he did the legalese stuff. So it wasn't too terribly expensive, a couple $1,000 for all of you guys who are interested. I get that question. I did some patent sketches, sent them off, and it was probably a 3-year process. You know, this wasn't easy either. There was some back and forth, but here it is in 2018, the patent was granted. And then I could be at the table with these guys. But hey, we all lived in the hood, making optical devices, all get our patents. In 2016, I moved back to Kalamazoo, and I work now as an art handler here, as a contracted art handler, and I work for the Arts Council as a freelance photographer. You might see me about town, so say hi, but I'm also at home making my twin scope viewer for museums, archives, stereo photographers, anyone who wants to exhibit their work in this format. And I make them off in the breakfast nook off my kitchen. It's like 5 feet by 5 feet. I can touch both walls. That's where I do the rubber casting, and I do the laser cutting at the makerspace, as I said. In my studio, I have an image of early stereoscope makers to carry the history forward. This is my production. One day in 2018, I made 85 viewers, and it was quite a year, and it was 90 degrees almost. So I went outside for a second, and I just had an impulse to grab my tripod and set it up. So I was actually working that day barefoot with this outfit on. But I set up the self-timer, and I was thinking of August Sander, the German photographer who made his typologies of people, like you've got the workers. And so I wanted to be that, you know, modern day factory worker woman. This is how the twin scope viewer looks today in cherry walnut and mahogany. It's designed to hang on the wall like binoculars. You put it to your eyes, you go back and forth behind that framed stereograph, or maybe the stereograph's in a display case, however it's done. I also made the Slim, which is a wearable lorgnette version. It's brought me into some incredible projects with I've produced shows with the twin scope viewer, but others have too. The Briscoe Western Art Museum, upper left, they had a show of like 85 original stereographs that helped turn the history of that area around, and bought 12 viewers. Alaska Native Heritage Museum on the far right, that's a show of Edward Muybridge's work, and the first images of Alaska were actually stereographs. They were 3D photographs that Muybridge made on his expedition to Alaska. So if you're interested in Muybridge, there's an excellent documentary that just came out. It's called Exposing Muybridge, and they might have it at the public library. They told me they were going to get it. Mark Schaefer is the director, and he contacted me, and I made some viewers for his traveling show of Muybridge's stereographs that's a companion to the film. There's the Smithsonian Archives of American Art, and some iPad views at the Buffalo Library. Museum of Modern Art, sadly, I never got to see this show, but over on the right-hand side, you see the viewers hanging underneath the stereographs for a show I'm sure I would have loved, because it's called Early Photography and Film, which is my game. But I never got there because it opened before COVID, and then it was COVID, and it just didn't work out. I think they took the viewers down at some point when people were getting interactive work off the wall. There's head of photography, Sarah Meister, holding my viewer. It's cute. I wish I'd gone and talked to her. I went to England and worked with the London Stereoscopic Archive. If you're familiar with Brian May of Queen, he is a huge collector of stereographs and has his own archive, and researchers can come in. It's one of the world's largest collections, owned by Brian May, and he's helping to revive this. There's the director on the left and his assistant. My friends were in front of Shakespeare's house, and they're taking 3D photos with their iPhones, doing a cha-cha. I teach to students. This is at the Putney Summer Arts Program. And adults in San Antonio on the street. And then here we come back to Kalamazoo. When I moved here in 2016, I thought there's got to be some local views of Syracuse, Kalamazoo in 3D. There must be. It just took a few years for me to get my attention around to it and to get the grants that I needed to produce the show. Shout out to the Arts Council. This was a series of 3 shows. The last one never happened because of COVID. The Kalamazoo Public Library, they only had a few stereographs, but what they had is really amazing. These glass negatives, stereo negatives, they're so hard to find. I never find them. And KPL has the collection from Wallace White, a photographer who worked 1870s, 1880s. So they gave me a desk, and I scanned those glass negatives and made contemporary stereographs so you could see what they're supposed to look like. Because the glass negatives had been scanned, and there's an enlargement of 1/2 of the view in the law library, but gee, this is not how they were meant to be seen. So here's one of mine. I'm using orange card mount to replicate how his cards would have looked. And that's downtown Kalamazoo, West Main Street in 1884, the opening of the streetcar line. So Greg mentioned the show, and it is up at the Kalamazoo Public Library today. They bought it. It's been up since 2019. So go to the 2nd floor in the local history room. There's about a dozen views of Kalamazoo back in the day. This was a show at the Zhang Legacy Collection Center. The water tower from the former Michigan Asylum for the Insane is in the background in the upper right. And I set up the display to kind of mimic that, so you see views of the interior of the space by Skylar Baldwin. Really incredible to get inside the asylum. But in reality, you're looking at what's on the same property. And then a VR program with WMU Library, where we talked about history and then bring it forward to do a VR thing. Most recently, here's the Virus Romance book that's up here if you want to look through it. That was in the recent West Michigan area show. Want to just quick go back to my first published photograph ever that ended up on the 7-inch of the Vine cover. And again, this like serendipitous life. I was called by the local historian to come at KPL, the library, to come look at my stereoscopes, just make sure they were looking good and stuff in early 2021. Well, turns out he was the singer of this band, and I didn't know him back in '91, but he's my partner now, and we've done some other things together. This is the band's Broken Hearts Are Blue. This is their recently produced studio album. So that was 30 years ago, the first image for his band's artwork, and now today, Ryan Gage, local history librarian, he's sitting there at his desk with my Kalamazoo views around him. He got the job after I did the show, so it's just kind of a wonderful coincidence. In 2000, I lived in a house in the Stewart neighborhood. I moved back in 2016. I answered a roommate ad without an address. It just said Stewart neighborhood, and I live in the same house just below. Let's see if there's a picture with my dad. No, I live directly below where I lived in 2000, so I can hear those footsteps up above and imagine that was me when I bought my first stereoscope, and now I'm making them on the floor below. Having lived in 4 states in between. I'm gonna round this out with Ronnie. Our project is a Prairie Round artist residency. And this first project that I would say we did together, except she was not a willing participant. In graduate school, I did portraits in 2010 in the old house I showed you in Syracuse where I lived. And I sat upright, stoically for the camera, posing as if for a daguerreotype, guilty of any offenses that twins might be guilty of. And then I asked Ronnie to pose similarly in the chair. I didn't give her exact instructions. I had no notion of making a stereo view of this. But when I got the pictures back, they were aligned so eerily that I started, well, this is a still from a video. I invite you, I know it's getting late, so I invite you to go to my website and watch the red twin, blue twin video. It's a couple minutes, and I must say it's pretty fun. But the video is me playing with those photographs and like overlapping them, and it's got a creepy soundtrack. This is a still from that. But basically, I was trying to find out what photography can tell us, what's under the layers. What can photography tell us about truth? We'd always been told we were fraternal twins ever since we were kids. And once I made these images and I aligned our face in the stereoscope, I wasn't buying it anymore. I always thought we were identical. So I made her do a DNA test after we did these portraits. And lo and behold, yep, we're identical. So this is a case where art it's a mode of inquiry for me. It always is a mode of inquiry. Except in this case, I got an answer, but most of the time I'm more interested in the questions. and in generating questions and in bringing people on an experience of discovery for themselves. I made a series of stereographs there's the one up here that I just showed you. If you want our faces to merge for yourself, it's up here, you can come look at it. I went to California and met with twin researcher Nancy Segal at the Twin Studies Center at University of California, Fullerton. And she's on a crusade, and I joined her. She's got a lot of things she's doing, but one of them is talking about the importance of twin type testing. If you have same-sex twins, you don't know if they're identical or fraternal unless you do a DNA test, no matter how different they look. And I know this to be true because my twin sister herself has twin sons, and they've been 4 inches apart for most of their lives. They don't look the same, but we did DNA tests for them last year, and they're identical too. One just got more nutrients in the womb. So a third of identical twins have separate placentas. If you know any identical twins and they wonder if they're actually identical or fraternal, have them do 23andMe. That's all we did. And we also got all the ancestry information too. Over the years with my stereoscopes, I'm really happy to say it has helped Ronnie. Here she's looking through my twin scope viewer and her mouth is open. I can tell she's seeing it in 3D. The more she does the exercises, the more she does get her stereo vision. And we applied to the Prairie Round Artist Residency in Vicksburg, Michigan. By the way, that's John Kern, Residency Director. Raise your hand, John. Happy to talk to anybody, right? Okay, good deal, of course. We applied to the residency wanting to do our first joint art project together because we have independent practices. She's a painter and a drawer, I should say illustrator, and interdisciplinary. She does many things, but different. And we applied together because she had just finished 2 months of vision therapy in Chicago, and she got a certification that now she's successfully got 3D vision. She worked with an optometrist, and that was really awesome. And we wanted to kind of make a story around that at the residency. And we didn't do that, but I'll show what we did do. This is my last project. I'm wrapping up, but Ronnie is entering, well, we're both going to the mill for the first time. We hadn't been in the door yet. She's standing in front of me. I just took a cell phone picture that she said print it because she loves Nancy Drew and it reminded her of that kind of scene. So we have a show up right now by appointment. It's in the Hills building on Main Street in Vicksburg, not at the mill. Part of it is a stereoscopic mill tour. Some of them are small images. And if you sit up at the iPad up here with my twin scope viewer, there's a rotating slideshow of those views. But here are some examples. I'm interested in a stereoscopic image that isn't just good in 3D, that also holds appeal as a regular photograph. So I'm suggesting that there's two places we might go, A or B choice, or 2 perspectives you could have. But this image, which of course is just one object, once it's doubled, I actually think it represents strabismus pretty well, because you have 2 pupils there that are misaligned. That's how Ronnie's eyes look. All right, here's her in the mill, just a quick shot I took that we ended up making a joint project together. It's being projected here on a raw canvas that she painted on. So when you see it in the space, it's part photo, part painting, and it has this bit of a dimensional quality. It glows and seems to come forward. So that's something I think we'll take further in our joint work together. And there she is. My work is in the back room, starting with a suite of images of Ronnie, and looking at the archive at the Vicksburg Historical Society. I was looking at images from the dawn of the mill, like 1905, 1910, and then into the 1920s and some from the 50s. And the ones from the 1920s were probably in my head as I saw a single image I took with Ronnie with my cell phone in a very bright vest, construction vest that I multiplied in Photoshop, and it to me has this quality of like surrealist 1920s theater. Yeah, or there's a brutalist architecture thing coming in here, and I don't photograph myself. I don't have her photograph me. I photograph her. I've always looked at her. I always photograph her, and she can sometimes stand in for both of us. The room had this red wall on the right-hand side with peeling paint coming down on it. That's about all that was in the room. And that's such a very strong piece of the room. And I extended it by creating 4 interrelated works. The one on the left with the stereoscope, then the wallpaper border, and there's a collage in the middle and a print on the end. The details then, the origin image on the left is a painted fire door in the mill. It's interesting now that I was making red work and I'm the blue twin. We grew up being dressed in red and blue, and I was blue, but this whole room is red, go figure. Anyway, the image on the right, these paint tendrils through the stereoscope are like coming right in your eyes. Here's the 1950s archival image of men in the mill, and I've also taken train, some steam coming out of a train to replicate like old factory smoke. If you look at, just imagine one quadrant, any of the 4 quadrants, like lower left, upper right, any of those is how I started the image, and then I mirrored it up and I mirrored it to the side to create this piece, and then kept going with it and created that wallpaper border. And I guess this kind of gets at a lot of my strategy is creating a sense of curiosity in the viewer. Like if you went into the room, you'd say, is that wallpaper border supposed to be here? In fact, there's wallpaper border in the room prior to this. So you might think it goes with it, but then who would put wallpaper border on plywood? So you're kind of trying to suss that out for yourself, and then you get closer and you see what looks like maybe Victorian wallpaper is peeling paint. So I like to bring, like I said, a process of discovery to the viewer. Replicated Ronnie, I call this. If you saw it in the gallery, on the back side, you'd see there's a piece of pink paper. So it's the transparency over pink paper. And the paper is it's a sample from the lead paper company, Mill. And I have some other samples I want to work with in the future. Oh, here's John Kern. Surprise. There's some anaglyph 3D images in the show here, and this was new for me. So you can give this one a go. Try your glasses on now. Red lens should be on the left side. Otherwise, I'm not sure what you'll see if you reverse it. But red is on the left. How's it working? Are you seeing a stereoscopic image coming out at you? Yeah. Okay. This one in the gallery, I have told people they can touch it, which is usually a no-no in a gallery, but you can touch it. And when you try to put your hand in there, the depth experience is way weird. I mean, it seems like you can put your hand inside of it further than what's actually happening. And when you go back and forth, it kind of moves with you. When you back up, you can back up to like 24, I don't know, you can back up quite a ways, and the pole seems to come out towards you. And I have to credit Ronnie for saying, why don't you try to do some anaglyph? Okay, it's red and blue. What's not to love? I get it. No, I think there's certain processes for certain means, certainly. And here we are just like a week ago at the show. I'm going to end with some links, but also I'm going to show more anaglyphs so you can keep the glasses ready, and I'll go from these links to more of the work. These are, Ronnie and I have a website, the second link that we just put up a week ago. The work is to come. The residency. If you want to learn more about twins, if you want to learn about vision therapy, or Stephen Kazisto, hope that wasn't too fast, but here we go with the anaglyph slideshow. And so the work was projected, you'll probably see this in 3D, right? Some of it's in 3D. I projected these images, this mill tour 9 feet high in a dark space, and it was pretty effective. And if you look at them without the glasses, I'm also interested in what the image looks like without that 3D effect. I appreciate that she's black and white and those colors have energy in them, but I think it could stand alone. And so what if you don't have stereo vision like my sister? I think that you could still get something out of the experience. So I hope I've addressed all of the description. I talked about Wonder as a social activist tool, and I talked a little bit about blindness and reversing that relationship between the sighted and the unsighted. I worked at the Kalamazoo Civic Theater as an audio describer for a while. I currently work for a company called U Exams that I read for test takers who are blind. But blindness there's a lot of issues. Literacy is a problem, so I hope my Braille piece gets people talking about how young blind students are not being taught Braille anymore, and if you don't know Braille, you're functionally illiterate. But the larger agenda with me is just to say that we all have valid perspectives, and maybe I don't take things at face value. When you're a twin and you look just like somebody else and people think you're the same but you know yourself to be different, it sets up a mistrust of surface impressions. Yeah, so that's my agenda, just to prompt people to look beyond their first impressions and to consider other points of view. Now we're leaving the mill. Of course, you got to look at yourself in the mirror on your way out. And I think that's it. Thank you so much. So I invite you to come up if you have time.
If you want to take questions.